Hey, everybody, welcome to the Buffalo Plus podcast. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Mike Catalano. We got a special guest with us as we talk about the Bills game coming up this week. John Ellis from the Roar podcast also does afternoons on Fox Sports Upstate. John, welcome to the Buffalo Plus podcast.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. It's like talking to family because it's Buffalo, it's Carolina. We all kind of intertwine here. We know each other well, so it's good to finally catch up with you one-on-one. This should be fun.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. I got to start with the head coach. I know I'm from the outside, but I'm wondering, what is Matt Rhule doing with this team?
Very good question. It's hard to say. He's a college coach, as you know. He came from Baylor University, spent some time at Temple, only had 1 year of NFL experience with the New York Giants. So one of the concerns we all had, I think, those who cover the team, follow the team, we liked his energy. We liked some of the messaging. But where's the meat? Where's the protein, as they say? Where is Matt Rhule's strategic advantage if indeed things don't resonate from the program building side? Now, they have built some good veteran pieces now with Stephon Gilmore. They solidified their defense with Shaq Thompson, Brian Burns, Hassan Reddick. Offensively, it's been a mess, Mike. The offensive line, led by Coach Pat Meyer, has underproduced. And frankly, in free agency, they just struck out. They went out day one, acquired Pat Elflein, the veteran, Cameron Irving, another veteran. And these are guys that weren't paid league minimums. I wouldn't say these were franchise contracts. These aren't, long-term killers, but it's not money well spent. These guys have not played a lot of football this year. When they have, it hasn't been great. To the point where Cam Irving is now calling out the media in press conferences saying that some in that room, not me, but some in that room are trying to divide the locker room. Okay. In any event, Matt Rhule has got a lot ahead of him here. Look, I don't take the position of wanting to fire people. That's not my job here. I am an analyst. My job is to look at the tape, to look at the context clues of what might be ahead, how they built their roster, what role has he had in that. And I'm just not certain if it's resonating right now. And I don't know if another year of doing the damage that, frankly, he's done in terms of a Sam Darnold trade, in terms of some of the free agency moves he's leaned on, is in the best long-term health of this franchise. So if I had to consult Dave Tepper, I would imagine he's being consulted by a lot smarter people than I am to say, Dave, you signed this coach to a 7-year deal. He's a good dude. He's a great college coach. I just don't know if this is working. Nick Saban, it took him 2 years to figure that out, and he was right back out the door in the college game. I think if Matt stays, and he says he wants to, he's committed. He had, obviously some opportunities came up these past couple of weeks with Oklahoma, Oregon, some other programs. I don't have any confirmation he was interviewed for those, but he was off that week. He was out of town. Who knows what would have happened? But then they fired Joe Brady, and that was the big stunner there at the back end of the bye week. So the Cam Newton signing, the Joe Brady firing, it's been a crazy season, Mike, and now they're out of the playoff race, and what's left to play for? Let's spoil some Buffalo Bills playoff hopes. That's where we're at right now.
Well, I guess when you describe that, it says to me, does this team think they're in a rebuild? Were they in a retool, going with some of those veterans? And I get the idea. You can't go with all young players. It's 53, man. You're around this game. Sometimes people think you go with all these young players. It just doesn't work that way. But I saw where Darnold's maybe going to practice now and coming back. I guess in theory, I sort of got the idea of taking a flyer on Darnold, but then they sign him to that deal. Are they trying to justify the signing? Because I think they're stuck with that contract for another year, right?
Yeah, Mike, they are. They committed to the $16+ million fifth-year option, as you're talking about, and I think it was a $4.5 million commitment this season, if I don't have my exact contract numbers up, but we're roughly in the same ballpark there. Yeah, they signed the fifth-year deal, ironically enough, right after they picked J.C. Horn in the first round of the NFL draft, and Justin Fields was on the board. You had Mac Jones on the board, who Matt Rhule coached at the Senior Bowl. The reporting I got on that from talking to my sources the day of the draft was Mac Jones was not in play. Now, there was a lot of speculation from reporters out there that Mac Jones was high on the list there. I can confirm that that was not the case for a couple people who were in the war room. So to take it to the Darnold point that you raise here, it's an interesting thing because he hurt his shoulder. They go out and they sign Cam Newton. Look, and I like Newton as a person. I think he's got some gas left in the tank. I'm probably one of the few analysts who think that because I really grind the tape and I see traits there that I can project out a few years. I think maybe by 35, it's time for him to dial it back and slow down. As far as Sam goes, I just never understood that acquisition, Mike. I never got it. I saw so much of his game tape in New York. I think the thinking was, look, he's like a rookie because he's young. For a 3-4 year veteran, he's a guy that has some youth on his side. He's been dinged up a little, but it's really a stint with mono that really sidelined him more than anything. He was a good trooper here, man. Early on, great training camp, was really connecting well with like Dan Arnold, a very good tight end, whom, by the way, they traded away 3 weeks into the season. It's a very fluid organization. They move fast. They move quick. They're not afraid to make big deals. Stephon Gilmore comes to mind. And Sam Darnold, I think they might have overreached on that one, Mike. I just don't see any team out there that was willing to put that much draft capital, 3 different picks, and take on that contract other than the Panthers. I will remind you of this and your listeners and viewers as well. Deshaun Watson very likely could have been a Carolina Panther as we speak right now, had his legal troubles not come up when they did. That was very real. That was a possibility back in like January, February timeframe. That fizzled out. They took a dive for Matt Stafford. He said no to that and went to LA. So Darnold was kind of option number 3. At that point, my co-host on the Roar podcast, Billy Marshall, and I kind of talked about maybe keeping Teddy's not the worst idea in the world.
Yeah.
Got him locked into the contract. Why are they doing this? And now we had a podcast yesterday talking about the state of the Panthers. And I don't do hot take radio. That's not me. I'm not that guy. But I raised up some of these points, like the Darnold move. Right after you sign Bridgewater, after cutting Newton, all these things roll over into the next year and you're not getting anything out of it. And now you're right back to square one with Cam Newton, paying him more than you would have had you just extended him. So hindsight's 2020. I get that. But some of these things you got to foreshadow. We'll see. Sam Darnold will probably play again at some point in a Panthers uniform. He might as well do it this year. I mean, if they're going to evaluate the guy, Mike, they're out of the playoff race. I like Cam. I like PJ Walker. But they spent 3 draft picks on him. Got to evaluate what you got.
Yeah. Well, we've seen a lot of Cam through the years and saw him in Foxborough, at least the Bills did, and then here in Orchard Park. But they're playing both. They're throwing Walker in the game. I have seen teams, attempt this at times where you're sort of shuffling quarterbacks in and out. And I guess I can see certain circumstances, but it does feel very college-like for an NFL team. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a college coach. So I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is Matt Rhule. This is why David Tepper was smitten with him in a way. He's different. He brings some unconventional stuff to the National Football League. I don't know if this can be mistaken as anything other than, I'm sorry, just not very smart. It doesn't work. And there's the problem I have with it too. If you're talking about a couple of quarterbacks with sort of defined roles, like Cordell Stewart back in the day with Neil O'Donnell, right. You've had situations like that. Then you had the Spurrier experiment in Washington where it was like Florida all over again. It was Werfel one week. Who were the other ones? Shane Matthews, I believe, was the next week. It doesn't work in the NFL. And that gets back to the larger point about hiring a college coach. When you don't have a strategic edge, Nick Saban had a strategic edge. He was a defensive mastermind with Bill Belichick those years in Cleveland. Rhule's a good football coach. He's coached every position group, but he doesn't have that one thing you look at and say, you know what? He's an offensive mastermind. He can really scheme you up defensively. He's a CEO. And as a CEO now, he's made a decision to sort of tease the opponents that, hey, you know what? We might throw PJ out there. We might not. It's different in every game. I think in the Miami game, Newton played terribly bad. It was awful. The offensive line was even worse. And I think he was trying to protect Newton from getting hurt more than because I would have left him out there and just let him work through it. He's a veteran. He doesn't, Cam can handle that. PJ just turns the ball over more than any quarterback probably I've ever seen in a Panthers uniform. He's got a lot of promise. He's a good player, a good young man. But if you're going to platoon guys in and out, you can't do it with a guy who has a interception rate of about 6%. That's just not good, smart planning. So it's different. It presents a challenge, I guess. But to me, it's like going back from the Panthers days where you would think of it like John Fox taking Jake Delhomme out for a couple series for Chris Winkie. We'd be apoplectic. Yeah. Or like Tom Brady coming out for, Brock Heward or Damon Heward,
whichever Heward. Yeah.
There you go. 40,000 backups he's had. But it's a lot of analysts and especially the fans are livid with it. The media is kind of in the press room scratching their head a little bit and like, what are we doing here? But let's just kind of see how it works out. It'll be a train wreck or it'll be a fascinating experiment that works out.
But you talk about having that exceptional guy, and that I at least felt like that's why they brought Brady in, Joe Brady, to be the coordinator, right? He had all that success at LSU, hot topic guy. Everybody was sort of looking at him, and they bring him in. And, there's something about bailing on a guy midseason, to me, says a lot about the head coach in many cases, not all, but in many cases. But it hasn't even been that much time. I mean, what's it been, a year plus that he's been there? And to do that in midseason does seem like a panic move. Does it feel that way? And what have you seen in the difference now in what they're trying to do on offense?
Well, to your first point, it felt that way when it hit my wire. I mean, I looked at the story and I was shocked. I mean, these are things you can tell when you develop some sourcing and you talk to people around the league and the building, you get a sense that things might be coming. This one kind of caught us off guard. And it happened also at a weird time. When you go into a bye week, Mike, you've covered the league for a long time. You get your business affairs in order that first couple of days, and then you have the rest of the week, obviously, to get your next guy ready. Well, they didn't do this until the end of the bye week. So it put Jeff Nixon, the interim OC now, who they called a decent game. To your second point, the concepts were pretty similar. There was a little more RPO. It was a little less diversified in terms of the route tree. So maybe what Matt Rhule's looking for is just let's dial it back a little bit. What it came really down to, I think, is Matt Rhule made an interesting comment to our friend, I believe it was David Newton, might have been Joe Person in the press pool there. I'll have to find who asked the question, but it was one of the two guys. What was the thought process in hiring Joe Brady with such an abrupt departure? And Matt kind of let it slip, or maybe he wanted to let it slip, that he, quote, went out of his comfort zone when hiring Joe Brady. That seemed to indicate that when you look at his staff construct right now, it's mostly Temple guys, Baylor guys he trusts. His defensive coordinator is Phil Snow, who's done a good job. His new offensive coordinator right now was Baylor's OC at Baylor when he was there the last year when they did some good things in the Big 12. So it's all Baylor right now. And, for Baylor fans out there, no offense, but this is the National Football League. Joe Brady, I thought, did a fine job here. I don't think he warranted a firing. I agree with your point. I brought this up on the radio. You look at the college game. Dan Mullen started doing this a couple of weeks ago before he got fired. A couple assistants got laid off. Ron Rivera did this the year before he got fired. Brady Hoke was fired as the defensive line coach. And that didn't come easy for Ron. He's a class act. But these are things that happen in the business. But in year 1.5, Mike, I mean, Ron was in year 8 by then. That was kind of like, okay, I know Dave needs me to make some moves. I don't know who pushed this. I really think it came down to, in the end, Matt wanted a certain dynamic to this offense that Joe was unwilling to bend on in terms of running the ball. And it sounds very simple, but I think Matt really wants to be what Bill Belichick was the other night against the Bills every week. And that's not the league we play in right now.
No.
I just don't think you're going to be able to just run at will with this bad offensive line right now. They got to upgrade first.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you. I mean, for this week, Bills fans know this team has struggled to stop the run. And we saw it. That New England game was, that was an extreme. And, when you talk to the players, they did give up only 14 points. It mostly was the failures of the Bills' offense.
Were you there at the game? Were you there at the game, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Were you in the press room?
Well, I was pregame live shots for a while. And I've covered a lot of games in Buffalo and other places.
The Micah Hyde exit, the walk-off Micah Hyde was a bit spicy. That was
Yeah, it
unfortunate.
got that way a little bit, and when you do look at it, I kind of agree with a little bit of it was a little overstated of the game plan by New England because the Bills did have multiple chances. I thought it was more about New England's defense and the Bills' failure on offense that
I
cost
agree.
them that game.
I
You know,
agree.
New England had that big run, but we've seen it happen with
Yeah.
the Bills' defense where they have given up big runs. They have not been able to get stops. It's interesting, even in that New England game, I think they had 9 tackles behind the line for loss. You know,
Yeah.
it's on 46 runs, but they had it. This past week, we were in Tampa and they ran it very well first half. Then the Bills adjusted a little bit, got more aggressive in the second half. In terms of Carolina, now with the Panthers, with no Christian McCaffrey, do they have, you said the offensive line, if Bills fans are worried about it, which they always are, can the Panthers run against this Bills defense?
It's going to be tough. I'll say this. I think if they have a chance to compete in this game, it's going to have to be small ball. They're going to have to just shorten the game, take the air out of it. The conditions aren't going to be as brutal as they were, it looks like, against New
Yeah.
England. Maybe 30s, a little bit of wind, which for us down here is, like torrential. But they'll be fine. They're pros. I think the ultimate thing you got to look at here is Newton. I would feature him in the run game. He's given teams like New England fits in the past with that. There was a game against Buffalo back in 2017 where it was very tight at the end. McDermott's first trip back to Charlotte,
Yep.
and Newton had a couple of key scrambles. He didn't pass very well in that game. Of course, it was a very good pass defense. It's going to have to be that type of game. They're going to be patient. But no, with Chuba Hubbard still developing, a good young back that still needs to learn how to, maybe get out of his own way at times in terms of contact balance. But it's got all the tools you look for. Amir Abdullah is a decent third down guy, but has struggled a bit at times. When you lose Christian McCaffrey, I mean, that's kind of where everything fell apart here. McCaffrey and Newton, that was the vision when they brought Newton back, was these two could be very dynamic in the run game down the stretch and mitigate this O-line problem. And now McCaffrey is not there to do that because McCaffrey can make a very marginal O-line look pretty good. He can make you
Right.
miss in space. They don't have that right now. So I think the key for Buffalo is just don't worry about playing any bare fronts. I heard suggested in that New England game, they were a little light in the box early. They were a little off center in terms of their over fronts. I would just play your standard base. Don't worry too much about stacking the box. And Newton is prone to make a few mistakes here or there. He might. It's going to be a different type of environment for him. Colder temperatures, colder weather. He's played up there from last year. He gets it. But they got to keep it low scoring. With Josh Allen health, I don't know if that's going to be an issue or not for Buffalo. If he's close to 80, 90%, Carolina's defense is active. They can get after it. Where they're soft is in the run game. We'll get to more of that, I guess, in a minute. But in terms of your question, yeah, I think it's going to be hard to run against Buffalo, even though Buffalo had a couple of stinkers there against Indy. But that's, again, Jonathan Taylor, Frank
Right.
Reich, a very good scheme. And, of course, the game you had mentioned earlier with the New England Patriots. And, of course, Tampa, they made adjustments in that game. But, yeah, it's going to have to be the type of game where Carolina has to get the run game early. They got to score first. If they get down early, it's over. I mean,
Yeah.
that's how they're built.
Well, Cam was here with the Patriots last year in Orchard Park and was driving to win the game. He kept it on the ground. It was low scoring back and forth. And Justin Zimmer ends up knocking the ball out, which was not about Cam as much as it was a huge win for the Bills to beat
Yeah.
the Patriots. Ended up sweeping them last year. But in terms of that, we could see that. As far as the passing game is concerned, whether it's Cam or Walker, how, again, would you expect them? Trey White's out. Tampa's Tampa, Brady's Brady.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an issue in the New England game because they didn't throw the ball. Bills adjusted a little bit better in the second half. But how would they attack or attempt to attack the Bills secondary? It's Levi Wallace. It's a young guy, Dane Jackson. What would you expect to see when they do throw the ball?
I would expect to see maybe a little more, and this is dangerous in Buffalo, you never know with the wind, but a little more vertical stuff. I think occasionally, what Carolina hasn't done yet with Newton, they really haven't opened it up. They've kind of eased him into the scheme here, throwing a lot of quick RPO glance stuff, which is, they bury the ball in the back,
Right.
pull it out, it's a quick slant. almost to the detriment of the offense because Dean Pease read that stuff last week and they undercut it for a pick six. I mean, they're running RPO. I think Jeff Nixon, again, he's new to this. This is part of the problem when you fire a coordinator who has experience. They need to take a few shots because if nothing else, you get DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, a couple of the better speed guys in the league. DJ's a great contested ball guy, a good 50-50 ball guy, and they just haven't utilized him in that way this year. They've got Cam playing pretty well right now. The Miami game, I threw that tape out because the offensive line was so bad. He made some really good throws against Washington. He made some really good throws last week with the exception of that pick six in Arizona as well. But I think the key to the passing game, it starts up front with protection. And that's depressing to talk about for Panthers fans because we know Sean McDermott can dial it up. Even when you guys have a down week or a down couple of weeks, there's Ed Oliver. There's guys all across that front that can move around. And what Sean loves to do more than anything is get pressure with four and let the back seven do the work. But if he can't, he can be creative and do a fire zone. I think you got to stick with Newton in this game. And that's not to say, I mean, you saw Newton in New England. There were mistakes there. There were errors. I think in the passing game, though, he gives you a better chance at eliminating fatal errors than PJ Walker. Again, I bring up PJ's 9 interceptions so far as an NFL quarterback. He's only played in a couple of games. He's had a couple of nice moments, but he's a Temple guy. So is Matt Rhule. There's a connection there to give yourself a chance to really compete, not only in the pass game, but also the run element that he brings, the bonus yards. You've seen Cam personally when he's been at his best, and he's back to that with his legs. He can get you 4 or 5 yards instead of taking a sack, and that's the difference between extending a drive and punting deep in your own territory. So if he doesn't throw the pick six last week, they maybe win that game, and we're talking about a different narrative this week. DJ Moore, I would say one more thing about Moore. Quick screens to him. Look out for that. They're trying to get him more involved in the quick game. Tommy Tremble's another guy to look for. Tight end out of Notre Dame, having a really good season so far up the seam. Good blocker as well. And they run a lot of angle Texas routes out of the backfield with Amir Abdullah. Look out for that. That's what I'd be keying in on unless they change up their entire game plan because it's not that complicated. It's 3 or 4 different concepts, and they've been sticking to it. The line's got to protect or they don't have a chance.
Yeah. If you see the tape on the Bills-Tampa game, they've got very little pressure. And then in the second half, they brought more. And Milano got a big sack late when they brought him. Tremaine Edmonds, who the more I watch Tremaine Edmonds play, the more I think he needs to be more involved as a pass rusher at a linebacker spot. He ended up getting beat for the late touchdown. We don't know about Josh Allen playing in this game. As we're recording this, he's limited. It could be Mitchell Trubisky, who has only played limited amount of time in this game. But defensively for Carolina, we know Stephon Gilmore well up here. He was a Bill, saw him all the time with the Patriots. How is he playing? And am I reading it wrong that his snaps have been, I don't know if we use the term limited. Has he been playing a ton of snaps?
Finally, yeah. I mean, this past week, he was over 60 snaps in the game. So they finally got him to a point where he's got a full load now. I think there were still some rehab considerations from his time in New England. By the way, he's not been happy about how that was handled publicly. But he's been an ultimate pro down here in Carolina. He's been a great guy in that meeting room for the defensive backs. They've got a veteran group. They've got guys like A.J. Bouye in that DB room as well, an emerging Jeremy Chin as a safety. Defensively, what really starts and stops for Carolina is early downs. And it surprised me last week because the formula is if you can limit team successes on early downs, especially in the run game, you get a team in a 2nd and 9, and then that turns into a 3rd and 8. That's where Carolina was so good early in the year. And they still are at times. Last week, they just got ripped to shreds on 3rd and long. And it was a combination of good block schemes by Atlanta. They were chipping, Brian Burns with Mike Davis, who was very familiar with them as teammates last year. They took Burns out of the game, and Reddick couldn't win the one-on-ones, and they couldn't get pressure inside. I just think it's going to have to be the type of game defensively for Carolina. Now, if Allen plays, it's a different story. Now, Trubisky can still run. There's that. They're both athletic guys. Key in on the run every week. You got to do that because they're light in the box. Carolina is. They're built for speed. They can be run upon, is what I'm telling you here. So if you get an early lead on Carolina, and the defense has to kind of keep pace. And, the offense is not going to score a lot of points. They can't pin their ears back and have fun. And that's the kind of defense Phil Snow has structured and the Scott Fitterer and Matt Rhule has built. It's a little light up front with the exception of maybe Derek Brown inside, but they're fast and they get there in a hurry almost every week. Last week was a bit of an exception. Usually when Brian Burns has a game where he doesn't feel like he's played his best, I'm good friends with his brother, Stanley McClover. We talk a lot. He's a former NFL guy. He said, John, just understand that when he goes off, he goes off. So I would say he may not get a lot of sacks this week. He will definitely impact the game this week because it happened after the game he struggled against Washington. He was blowing stuff up down in Miami, yelling in the sidelines, trying to get people, motivated. Linebackers are solid. I mean, Jermaine Carter, Shaq Thompson, they're good run fit guys, but lately the run fits haven't been great. The teams have kind of exposed on the outside zone, so they're kind of getting lost in the creases there. But yeah, Stephon Gilmore has been a great addition. He won them a game in Atlanta covering Kyle Pitts all day and just shut him down. It's going to be exciting to watch him down the stretch, and hopefully they can keep him around for a while and extend him. He's a local guy from Rock Hill right down the road. The rest of the secondary is very solid. Dante Jackson is out, one of the starters, so a chance for Stephon Diggs and the crew up there to maybe have a little bit of an advantage that they otherwise wouldn't. But Carolina's playing a lot of young guys too. Miles Hartfield, Sam Franklin. So it's a mixed bag. They got to get pressure. They got to stop the run on early downs. If you get in 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2, that's what New England did to them early on. That's what Washington did. And the defense just wears down.
Yeah. Gilmore and Diggs, will that be a sought-out matchup, do you think, from the Panthers? Or is it just based on the coverage is called and where Diggs ends up?
Well, it depends on who you ask. I think if you ask Mr. Gilmore, he's going to say, give me Mr. 14 right there. Give me Mr. Diggs. That's what he did with Kyle Pitts. He just told Phil Snow, I want Pitts, and he took him all game. Now, Diggs is an interesting challenge. He's a much different player than Kyle Pitts, much more fluid in his release. He's a pure receiver. But Gilmore is a very skilled corner. I would think that would be a decent idea. You have some good slot play with Beasley there. You've got a number of people to keep an eye on in terms of your passing attack. But I think it starts with Diggs, especially if Trubisky plays. You got to get, a guy who hasn't played much, the number one target, take him out of the game. I would shadow him. I would honestly do that because on the other side, you have CJ Henderson, who's a recent trade acquisition, who's been up and down, hadn't been too great. Like I said, Dante Jackson's been out. They have Keith Taylor, who's a very promising rookie. So, I mean, I would just match up with their best guy and run with him all day. And I think Gilmore would be up for that challenge.
Yeah. I don't know about Emmanuel Sanders playing. He was banged up, the knee, didn't practice on Wednesday. Gabe Davis is a good player that needs more time. And he's a guy I think they're going to go to more. And Beasley is banged up. These veteran rest days. He's been getting a lot of them. And with all the, vaccine talk and everything around Beasley, he is one of the toughest players you'll ever see. He goes out there hurt a lot. And I don't think he's been healthy, but they did get the ball to him a lot in the second half. I would think Gabe Davis is a guy, if they go after Diggs and try to take him out as best they can, it would be Davis who would get a lot of snaps. I want to ask you about Sean McDermott. And this is the first time really that there have been, fans get anxious. This team has not been playing well. They're now at 7-6 and struggling at this point. But Sean and Brandon Beane and these guys had a plan, their process, and it's worked. What is the perception now, as the Panthers have gone through many changes, of the two guys that are in Orchard Park?
Please come back. Speaking for the fans there. As an objective journalist here, look, Matt Rhule's going through it right now. It's growing pains, but as for Sean, as for Brandon, that was a great get for Buffalo. And I hate to tell fans how to fan, so I'm not going to speak for the Buffalo Mafia. The Bills Mafia, you guys are a different breed, and I love y'all. And I get it. You're frustrated because you thought, the Bills are finally past the Patriots. We finally got over the hump, and lo and behold, here comes Bill Belichick, and his defenders are back, and here's Mac Jones and the running game. It's frustrating. I get it. You're still in a playoff position here. You're still competitive. And I think long-term, you're still built for some great things. You've got your franchise quarterback. McDermott is a very skilled tactician, by the way. And this is what I talk about in terms of what I'd like to see and a head coach. If Carolina, and this is a big if they go in a different direction, you got to have somebody with some strategic background in this league. And you bring people with you that have experience, like a Leslie Frazier, guys like Brian Dable. I know Brian's catching a lot of strays too right now, but Brian was the toast of the town a few weeks ago. I mean, I was reading stuff about Brian. He's the next hot coordinator to get this league. Mike, it turns fast, as Joe Brady would tell you. I would just tell Bills fans, if I had any advice, Sean is one of the hardest workers in the business. The Jim Johnson lineage is just something that lasts for a lifetime, spending time under Andy Reid, learning from there was a friend of mine, Luther Broughton, who played for one of these Eagles teams where the staffing on this team, you wouldn't believe it, Mike. It was Bill Callahan. John Gruden was on that staff at one point. It was a laundry list of guys. Ron Rivera. I mean, there's just guys left and right.
John Harbaugh.
Harbs was on that staff. That's right.
Yeah.
So you've got just an amazing culture there that Sean cut his teeth in, to the point where Luther called him Dwight Schrute of the staff at the time. He was the assistant. Sean has ascended. And there were a lot of doubts about Sean early on in his career as DC. And I think he ended up getting canned, I believe. And that's when Ron Rivera connected with him from their days in Philly. And they built some special stuff here in Carolina. So there were people at times saying, we should have kept Sean and not Ron. It doesn't work that way. You know that. You can't get it both ways.
Right.
Hold on to those two. Bean is very gifted. It's one guy that I do see going places for a long time in this league. He'll be there for a while in Buffalo. I don't think he wants to go anywhere, but he'll be a GM that, maybe one day we're talking about in the same breath as Bill Polian. He's very, very good. Yeah.
Obviously, I was here covering them when Bill was here, and we've seen what he had done, certainly in Carolina and Indy going on. And, they make mistakes. This is the thing I try to express to fans. Like, again, they have built a culture. They have built a winning idea of this team. It's a little bit down right now, but you do have the quarterback, and that's a good place to start with. And they have a lot of things going in that direction. But again, you make mistakes. They have issues on both lines of scrimmage right now, and they've tried to invest in the D-line. They haven't gotten what they wanted. But this is the NFL. I mean, what do we say? Not for long, right? Is what NFL stands for. And you got to figure it out. Yeah, you got to figure it out.
You got to figure it out. To the point about Matt Rhule, where it was considered to be a long-term rebuild, a 7-year contract. Just told people when it happened. Folks, David Tepper is a hedge fund guy, and Dave seems like your best friend right now, but he's going to be ruthless if he doesn't start winning. And this is going to be 2 years in a row with a losing record, it looks like, for Carolina. And again, the point about Sean McDermott and his staff, I would say it's all about perspective. Buffalo's been competitive here as a playoff team for a few years. So being on the precipice of the 7 seed feels like a bad year. I get it totally. Carolina, I feel bad for our fans down here because it's covering the team. You kind of isolate yourself from the emotions of it. You just focus on the film. But fans are just apathetic, and they're just depressed about it. And it's just so sad to see a stadium that was full of energy a few years ago going to the Super Bowl, and with Luke Kuechly and Cam Newton in his prime and Greg Olsen, and guys get old and guys retire. The problem is, when you rebuild halfway, if you had an exciting young quarterback to revolve around, like a Fields or, even a Rashawn Slater at left tackle, somebody you could see developing, then there's some excitement. But right now it's kind of like we go get Sam Darnold, and that's after Bridgewater. I mean, we're living in mediocre city when we were told mediocrity wouldn't be the case. So Dave Tepper, you know this from the Pagula family, you got to learn how to own. Pat Kerwin said that to me one time. And he had to go through it with his first hire. It didn't work out. A lot of first-time hires do not work out. I hope it does for Matt. I really do. I'm pulling for him. But Sean has got a bright future. And if the day he gets fired from Buffalo will be 2 seconds, somebody will call and hire him.
Yeah. Yeah, it is circumstances, like I said, a lot of times. But and they're not done by any stretch. And there's still a path to the AFC East, even though they'll be rooting for the Colts this weekend, I think. And if that happens and the Bills win, it's for first place in Foxborough next week. Hey, this has been great. Will you let everybody know, especially this week, Bills Mafia, where they can follow you, where they can hear you?
Oh, come on and troll me at my Twitter page, please. It's at the number one, at One Panther Place is where you can troll me all day long. I probably get more hate from Panthers fans than Bills fans at this point, because I'm a little honest. But yeah, come on and see us and hang out with us. We'll be on Fox Sports Upstate. You can catch us on iHeartRadio. It's on the app there. Download that. That's from 4 to 6 p.m. It's called Game On, and we talk NFL all day long. The Roar podcast on Blue Wire as well. That's a weekly show.
And, there's a lot of people here that always follow what's going on in the Panthers. The joke used to be when the Panthers signed a player, he's a future Buffalo Bill. I don't know if that happens as much now since Sean and Brandon have been out for a while, but there's still a lot of eyes. And with Cam Newton and Stephon Gilmore coming up to Orchard Park, I think everybody's going to be locked in for guys that they certainly know. Thanks again, John Ellis, our guest this week. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe here on the Buffalo Plus YouTube channel.